You're listening to the Pulled by the Root podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Heidi Marble. I am so glad that you are joining us for this episode with Astrid Castro of Adoption Mosaic. Our conversation darted off in all directions. We talked about her advocacy. We talked about her snowboarding days. And I think the most powerful moment for me was toward the end when we actually shared what it's like to parent when you're adopted and how that translates to our children. There is so much good stuff in this episode. I know that you will get as much out of it as I did. Enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pulled by the Root podcast. I am so excited to introduce you to Astrid Castro. A lot of you already know her. When I came out of the fog 7 months ago, Astrid's voice was on Haley Radke's podcast, Adoptee's On. And as I learned more about Astrid and found out that she lived close to where I live in the Portland, Oregon area, I reached out to her and she generously accepted the invitation to speak with us. I would like to read her bio to you, and then we'll get started on asking some questions. Astrid Castro is the director and founder of the Adoption Mosaic, a Portland-based organization which strives to connect, honor, and serve the adoption constellation through innovation in education, practices, and support services. Astrid has a degree in sociology with an emphasis in adoption. For 20 plus years, she has traveled the country to lead youth groups, present workshops on transracial parenting, talking with children about adoption, and various other workshops focusing on adoption. Prior to creating the Adoption Mosaic, Astrid worked in both private and public sectors of various adoption organizations, such as the Oregon Post Adoption Resource Center, Holt International, and Rocky Mountain Adoption Exchange, just to name a few. Astrid co-authored Adoption in the Movies, which takes the reader on a guided tour of 27 movies and documentaries that are dripping with adoption, which are asking questions that encourage the viewer to engage in ongoing dialogue and discussion. She has also developed an innovative, evidence-based 27-minute DVD titled Adoptive Parent Training, Developing Communication Skills. The training demonstrates how adoptive parents can communicate openly and honestly with family, friends, and especially children. Astrid is a former member of the board of directors of the North American Council on Adoptable Children and author of many articles on the subject of adoption, and has contributed a chapter to the book Parents as Adoptees. Astrid's personal experience as an adoptee, a woman of color, and growing up in a white family and a community fuel her professional path to helping others. Astrid is aware of the benefits of post-adoption services for individuals and their families and seeks to bring these services to the adoption community. Her lifelong interest in adoption is rooted in her own adoption at the age of 4 from Colombia, along with her older sister. Astrid has been in reunion since December 2012 with her birth family in Colombia. Oregonian article on Astrid's journey of searching and finding her birth mother. When Astrid is not working, she loves to spend time with her family, friends, enjoying adventures, and being the mama of an amazing teenage daughter. Mm-hmm. Well, Astrid, what an incredible life you have lived and the help that you have given to the adoption community. I just want to say, so beautiful. And I would love it for people that aren't familiar with your adoption story. Maybe we could just start there and just tell us what you feel comfortable sharing about your own personal journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So my sister and I were placed in an orphanage, and until we were in reunion with our birth mother, there was very limited information on why we had been taken to the orphanage, why our birth mother, or actually even who took us to the orphanage, and why we had been relinquished. The story, the narrative that we grew up with was the narrative, chances are your birth mother wanted to give you a better life. And it was clear that my sister and I had experienced some pretty extreme poverty, we were malnourished, and so forth. And So we had gone into the system, the orphanage system in Colombia when we were 4.5 and 6 years old. I was the younger one of the two of us, and she is my full biological sister. And then we were adopted into a family here in the United States. They were at the time living in Massachusetts, outside of Boston, in Wayland, Massachusetts, and they weren't able to have children. So they decided to adopt. They decided to adopt a sibling group there's different versions of mom's version versus dad's version as to why they decided to adopt an older sibling group. But it's somewhere in between. We knew we wanted to have more than one child. We wanted to keep siblings together, and we wanted to go through the process only once. So it was a combination of all of that. So they also had been trying long enough that they didn't have a need. Again, this is the narrative we grew up with. They didn't have a need to parent an infant, start off parenting an infant. So adopting older children was a reasonable fit for their family and how they were wanting to create their family. So my sister and I came to the United States. We came together. My adoptive parents, didn't travel to Colombia at the time. There was advisory to not travel to the country because of the internal war, internal strife that was going on, and that it wasn't safe for our parents to travel there. So we came on a plane with a social worker, an escort social worker, and she spoke Spanish. But when we arrived and we met mom and dad at the Logan Airport in Boston, they didn't speak any Spanish. And of course, we were young and we didn't speak any English. So they ran around with, dad has really silly stories. At least I grew up thinking how silly they were, right? And now as an educator and being so well informed around the trauma that was happening at that time, they're not silly stories. They're actually quite painful to hear. But dad's running around with a dictionary trying to get us to repeat the words that we were saying, and we apparently, according to dad, we realized pretty early on that we could make some jokes or play with them because they didn't know what we were saying. So we would say something, and dad has these stories of we would say something and then they were like, sure, we didn't want to upset you. So we knew it was a yes or no. So we said, sure. And then my sister and I would run off into a corner and they were like, uh-oh, what did we just say that they could do? And they would follow us and peek in, and we would just be standing there giggling like, oh, he had no idea what we just said. So I think, I share that story because I think it speaks volumes into the experience that we were having. And yes, I'm sure I don't remember the trauma that was happening at the time. I do remember a lot of happy memories, a lot of goodness, a lot of love, and so forth. And so my sister was the older one of the two of us. So I think she carried more of the memories of what it was like living with our birth mother and the transition. She had more of an understanding, a 6-year-old version of an understanding of what was happening to us. And I was kind of, in some ways along for the ride because my sister had always kept me safe, and she was a parentified child, and she'd done a great job in Colombia. And I think my little subconscious mind thought that she would do a great job no matter, as long as I was with her, I would be cared for and taken care of. And so then fast forward 3 months after my sister and I arrived, mom was pregnant with our son, with their biological son, our little brother. And we grew up, that was the 5 of us. We moved a lot growing up, and about an average of every 5 years we would move because of dad's job. And every time we moved, we would move from one white suburbia USA to another white suburbia USA. And I think when I was in my 20s, I asked, why did you choose the the towns that we moved to. And Dad said, he was getting promotions and within the company that he was working at. And he would go to his boss and he would say, where do you live? Because that's where I want to live. I want to live where you're raising your kids, and because back then there wasn't internet, there wasn't researching neighborhoods. It was, calling up new coworkers and saying, what neighborhood do you live in? And I'll go check that out. And so, the neighborhoods and the areas that we grew up in were very affluent, very white, very just a lack of diversity, racial diversity, economic diversity. There's just a lack of diversity. It was very, very monotoned, if you will. And so then when I had been that kid out of the two of us. My sister and I had always been the kid who was wanting to someday search for a birth mother, get answers. I would ask my sister questions, but I saw that was upsetting to her and it was activating her. And so I learned at a pretty young age that she wasn't going to be the person that would be able to answer my questions. So I was a seeker of knowledge. I was a seeker of all right, well, if I can't, nobody's going to tell me I can't find out. So I'm just going to go and figure this out. And when I was, and then my career launched in adoptions by being on my first panel when I was 18 years old. And I sat on an adoption, the Rocky Mountain Adoption Exchange, adoptive parent training panel, and they had never had an adoptee on their panels. They had only had they would bring in adoptive parents, seasoned adoptive parents, to talk about their experience. And of course, those parents were usually the ones that were pro-adoption, having really successful raising their kids and having really successful relationships with their kids. It wasn't the other, there was no look at the other side of the grief and the loss and the trauma and all of that. And we're talking about the early 90s, right? When I was doing this. And so I was volunteering at the Rocky Mountain Adoption Exchange, and they asked if I was willing to sit on a panel for them, and because I really enjoyed telling my story, and I said, yeah, sure. What do I have to do? And they said, oh, just tell your story. And I was like, okay, that's easy. So I sat on the panel with all adoptive parents and myself, and then I told my story, and afterwards, everybody waited in line to have a little private conversation with me of oh my gosh, you just changed my life. And, oh, thank you so much. And your story was so fabulous. It was so amazing. And that was my very first experience of being on a panel. And what I did, like so many of us do, is we overshare, we overexpose ourselves. We don't realize the emotional labor that's going on and how we're going to feel about this afterwards, kind of like the fallout, if you will. And I remember asking myself, even on the drive home from being on that panel, why did I share such intimate details about my life that I wouldn't share with a total stranger? What was that about? And I think I analyzed that question for many, many, many years because I continued to do that. I continued to tell my story, and I continued to overshare, and I continued to tell about my trauma and my high school years and the racism that I experienced. And I was finding myself in some ways healing, but in some ways re-traumatizing myself, right? And so finding that balance was I didn't have peers that were doing it alongside me and being on panels, because I was one of there were other people, other adoptees who were doing this in other states and so forth. But wasn't very many of us. And I think there was this mentality and this idea that oh my gosh, we've been asked, like our stories mean something. And it was very validating to be asked. And so we would have a tendency to get really comfortable in those settings and overshare in a way that I think was damaging and unhealthy. And so then fast forward to the work that I'm doing today with Adoption Mosaic, and we do a lot of adoptee panel work. We have a program called We the Experts Adoptee Speaker Series, and my goal and my hope is that every adoptee who has ever been on a panel, the first time, right out of the gate, the first time that they are sharing their experience of being adopted, or whatever theme we're talking about for that particular month, that from the jump that they get that experience of, oh, okay, this is what it should look like. This is what speaking my truth, but also holding some healthy boundaries. This is what it looks like to be supported by the other panelists who are here. This is what it looks like to be, we pay our panelists a small honorarium, but we feel that that's really valuable and really important as a way to say, this is emotional labor. You are sharing your story and you're bringing your story for others to learn and to grow, and for some to heal, and for others it's to learn how to do it differently, and so forth. So a lot of the work that we're doing right now is really stemmed from some of those early years and those experiences that I had being an adoptee and wanting to get in the industry, working and supporting my community in a way that felt right to me.
Oh, Astrid, that was so powerful. And I think you've hit on so many things I'd like to expand on. First and foremost, how did you get on the panel at 18? So you were volunteering. Mm-hmm. Were you out of the fog at that point? Or
yeah,
how did you, I mean, that's so young to be starting your advocacy. I'm interested to fill in the blank there. Like, how did you go from 18 to sitting on a panel? Wow.
Yeah. So I was actually at 18, I had graduated from high school, and we were living in Massachusetts when I graduated from high school. And then our whole family moved to Denver, and I had two choices. I really struggled in school. I was diagnosed as being dyslexic at 14, and the whole school system was like, whoa, this is one of those kids that fell through the cracks. Like, she doesn't know how to read and she's 14. So I got pulled out of mainstream school and I went to a private school for dyslexics, and kind of rewired myself and the goal was, in the last 4 years of high school, was I was going to learn how to read at a 5th grade level. That was the goal. And I'm very happy to say I successfully graduated, and I'm not sure at the time I was at a 5th grade reading level, but, we'll just say I was. And
I support that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I'm 50 now. So,
yeah.
The diploma was well earned. Once I got into that private school and we started from the basics, I was like, oh, this is what it looks like to be in school and to get good grades and to be successful. Because up until then, from all of my academic high school, middle school, elementary was just a disaster, as far as the system wasn't there to support me and what I needed. And so school just wasn't my jam. It just was. And so the plan had been, I'll go to college if we can't figure out anything else to do. But when mom and dad said they were moving to Denver, which was not part of the plan, I was going to live at home and go to college, and have their support as I was going. Because being in college, they were helping me with being my readers or helping me with my homework and those kind of things. And so when they said, hey kid, like we're moving to Denver, and you've got two options. We've set up a family friend that you can live with them. They'll help you. Of course, we'll help you from afar. If you decide to go to this college, I was in Massachusetts, or you've become a really good snowboarder. And if you want to come out to Colorado with us, we'll support you in maybe snowboarding. And I was like, yeah, that option sounds way better.
I'd pick that one too.
I picked that one, right? Like that was a no-brainer. I was like, really? That's an option? Like, sweet. All right.
Okay.
And so that summer, I drove a car out west, and landed and went to a snowboard camp at Mount Hood here in Oregon. And Mount Hood is one of the only, I don't know if it still is, but at the time it was the only lift access glacier that was had access during the summer because it was a glacier and in the United States. So there were people from all over the country that were training skiers and snowboarders and so forth that would come to Mount Hood to train, and they had camps and all of that. So I went to a snowboard camp because I wanted to become a competitive racer. And I left the snowboard camp, drove down to Denver, and in Denver, I went and applied to become a snowboard instructor in Vail that winter, and I landed that job. And then I raced on the weekends or on the times when I wasn't working as a snowboard instructor. And then I started racing World Cup eventually, and went to Europe and raced, met my ex-husband and snowboarding. So that all happened during dryland training. Sorry, this is full circle. During my dryland training, I would go down to Denver in the summer and stay with my parents in Denver. And I was like, okay, I'm training about 4 hours a day for like physical training. And I have all this other time. And my parents were really supportive of me not needing to get a second paid job. And because my snowboarding was really consuming me. So I decided that I was going to volunteer with some extra, because I had a lot of extra time. And I called up, I shared this because I know you listened to Haley's podcast.
Yes.
I know this is, so for those who have heard this story, at the time I was very clear that I wanted to, if I was going to give my time to an organization that had anything to do with adoption, I was well aware of the disparities between the haves and have-nots in the world of adoption. I knew that adoptive parents were the ones that were resourced, had access to support, had access to being able to adopt children. I knew that birth and first parents were the ones who were powerless and weren't getting the support and weren't getting the services that they need. And then us adoptees were in the middle of all of this, and that we also weren't getting the support. But I wanted to volunteer. I wanted to give my time to an organization that had high ethical values around how they served and supported birth and first parents. And so I called up every adoption agency, and I've said this before. I'm not proud of the fact that I did this simply because of how many birth and first mothers I know now, and and the ethicalness of what I did at the time. It's one of those things where I'm glad I did it for the time, because it really helped me to get a lens of what it was like to be a birth or first mother making that call for the first time. So I pretended that I was pregnant. And I said that when I called, I called the adoption agencies. I said, I'm pregnant. I'm looking to place my baby. And over the phone, I made sure that I said, I am from Colombia, I'm Latina. I didn't say that I was an adoptee. And the baby daddy is African-American. And the way I was treated was, I think, a huge indicator. Like it launched me into what I do today, as far as equity, as far as like giving voices to, because that first experience when you asked, like, we're like at 18, were you out of the fog? And I would like for your listeners to just know that how I define being in the fog or out of the fog, or still trying to get, some awareness to this day. My working definition is simply somebody who is still processing how adoption has impacted their life and how that has impacted to where they are today. And so as soon as we start looking at that and analyzing that, that is a lifelong process. So when somebody asks me if I'm out of the fog, I say, you know what, there's certain aspects that I have really put a lot of time and energy, and I have a lot of resources, and there's a lot of books that are written about this, and other scholars who are doing phenomenal, other adoptee scholars who are doing phenomenal work and research, and so I have access to being supported within this topic. Then there's other topics like reunion, and I would say I'm not. I haven't figured out. I'm navigating that, and if we're using the term fog or not, being in the fog or out of the fog, I would say that process of how my reunion has affected me and who I am in these last 10 years is a work in progress. I am still trying to figure that out. And so I would say if we're using that working definition of being in the fog that I just described, I would say I'm very much in the fog of that, my reunion and ethical practices around what reunion means for all members of the adoption constellation, not just me. But how is it affecting my birth mother? How is it affecting my sister who our birth mother parented? How is it affecting my adoptive parents who found out that we were black market babies as a result of this reunion? How do we, like, all of these pieces of this mosaic is one that I still have a lot of work to do. And before I can go and say I can be a good support person to somebody who's in that space for themselves. So that experience of calling the adoption agencies, I think really launched me into this state of mind of, whoa, we have a lot of work to do here. And I don't think at the time, I was 18, I don't think at the time I was able to conceptualize it and put it into this neat little package of, okay, we need to offer some programs over here and we need to do this and we need to do that. I think it was just like, how is it that we are treating other human beings like this? How is it that I was on the call and some of the agencies were treating me the way I was being treated? It was so painful. And then there was one organization who the volunteer coordinators said, the social worker that I spoke to, said to me, oh, well, we don't place babies for adoption. This is what we do. We support children who are in the foster care system who are at risk to age out of the foster care system. So we do special recruitment. That's the Rocky Mountain Adoption Exchange. And we do special recruitment on some of the kids who have been so institutionalized. It's hard to find families or harder to find families. So we're doing a lot of trainings and destigmatizing the foster care system and children who are in foster care and so forth. And then they said, and here are some resources that if you decide to parent or you decide to place your child for adoption. And that was the only agency that really, at that time, I'm hoping that would be a different story today, but at that time, that was the only agency that said, adoption is not your only, we don't want you to think that that's your only option. There are other options. Parenting is an option, and we want to help you with that. So here's some phone numbers, here's some places to go. And every other agency treated me like a commodity, or treated me like, oh, I have something that you want, right? And that feeling just made me sick to my stomach. And so I was like, okay, well, and when I got off the phone with the social worker at the Rocky Mountain Adoption Exchange, I hung up, called back, and I said, hi, my name's Astrid. I am an adoptee and I'm looking to volunteer. And they forwarded me to the volunteer coordinator. And the rest is history.
Astrid, I think that's, I know you were apologizing for like calling and saying you were pregnant, but I think that's brilliant. Like that's like top-notch investigative reporting right there.
Right. Well,
but I mean,
us adoptees, I think we're, as a result of our adoption, so many of us do become really, really good at that private investigation, right?
Oh my gosh, I practice it on my son all the time. Yeah, I think, one of the things I'm learning as a student coming into this is that we are like that hypervigilance and just being able to try to read other people to see if they're safe and to try to understand and to be constantly, it's like you were talking about the emotional labor. And that really stood out to me too, Astrid, the first time we spoke. I've always wondered why after telling my story, I like have to sleep for 3 days. It's because, it is emotional labor. And I think labor can result in something coming out of it. But I think, what you're saying is really important, that we have to tell our story, and forgive me if I'm wrong about this, in a safe environment. Right? Because so many people want to tell their story and they want to tell all of it because they haven't been heard. But that's scary. Like it can hurt them too. So that whole part of what you said was really interesting to me as well, to hear you speak about that.
Thank you. I will say, Heidi, I think that the one thing that I would add to that is I feel like we're having conversations about we're having conversations about, oh, this is a safe space, right? And I am starting to have more and more conversations with people and realizing that my working definition of safe space is going to be very different to your working definition of safe space, right? And so as far as the work that we're doing, we are attempting to create a space that is inviting to individuals, and we can't guarantee that this is a safe space for you. And we are striving for that. However, let's check in about how you define safe. What do you need from this panel? What do you need from these other panelists? What do you need from me as the facilitator of this panel to make this a safe space? And one is, I'm going to give you a place to tell your story that's not on the big screen, that is not in a place that is exposing you unfairly, but instead this is just a conversation between me and the other three panelists. And and then we'll get to the nitty gritty of, okay, now the theme of this next month's discussion is going to be X, Y, and Z, right? But really, like defining safe space is all of us as panelists. We define that every single month that we're doing this. We have to redefine that according to who is on our panel.
Well, that's really powerful because that shows like you're doing the hard work behind the scenes. And I think individuating this is really important, kind of who do you have in front of you and what is their journey? I think that matters a lot because someone kind of older and crusty like me might be able to share a little more. But I think that's really important that we continue to check in with each other and that there are resources available. And I think that's one thing I'd love to talk to you about too, as far as, mental health and all the things. I mean, statistics for adoptees are really grim. And I think I've sought out therapy multiple times in my life, but I have never had one therapist ask me if I was adopted. And I think that's one of the things that has been so mind-blowing to me is, oh my goodness, we should be starting with that question. And I'm not faulting therapists because there are so many gifted healers out there, but I think the conversation needs to be had that people that are dealing with these issues are coming into therapists' offices. And if this issue is not, you just walk away with even more unresolved. Am I making any sense? It's very complicated. I wonder what you what you think about that. Like, what do helping professionals need to do? Because that's part of the support and the safety.
Yeah. That's I think one of the first things that helping professionals need to do is to not check the box of they specialize in 40 different topics. It is impossible to be a therapist and to specialize in 40 different topics, right? And so I think, like, don't check the box of you specialize, or that, yes, adoption, foster care, drug addiction, mental health, ADHD, attachment disorder, like all of the things. And you see, when you look at one of Psychology Today, or you're looking for a therapist and you go onto one of those sites, and if you type in adoption, you will get hundreds and hundreds of hits in how many people have checked the box of, yeah, I could talk to somebody in therapy about adoption. I've covered that. They haven't covered it. They don't have any personal experience, or they haven't gone and done their work around getting involved in the adoption constellation. I think our panel work, this is a plug, if you will.
No plug. We need this. We need panels. We need plugs.
Well, and that's the thing, Heidi. I am a strong believer that if you are checking that box, you should be active in one of the adoptee spaces that we have created. And so, our We the Experts Adoptee Speaker Series it's the perfect place to go and get once a month 4 adoptees who have practiced telling their story, who are supported in telling their story, who have a community. This is what being an audience member to an ethical panel experience, if you will, and start asking those questions of, should I sit on this panel? Are the panelists getting paid? Are the panelists getting supported? Do the panelists have resources to a list of adoptee competent therapists when they're done? Like, if we start learning as professionals how to ask these questions, the supply and demand of ethical panels will change as we know it. And so that is one of the things, like I was saying earlier, that I really want every adoptee who's ever going to tell their story to have this experience, because this is how it should feel. It's not too much to ask for that. And so when we're looking at helping professionals, or we're looking at social workers who are placing children, babies, older children, child welfare, whatever type of adoption, should be attending every single one of our We the Experts. They should have a subscription, and they should be paying to attend these events and hear from those lived experiences in an ethical practice.
And I can't imagine a better way. And I want to experience this myself. Once I come up from the interview waves, I'm like, this is so great, but I don't know what's happening. I'm really looking forward to diving more deeply. But I think, what better education, as a helping professional, or really anyone in the adoption constellation, to sit back and listen to something that's so structured and carefully crafted, in protection of all. And I think that that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I think one thing I'm learning too is, as we're trying to develop our own platform, Astrid, my sense is that, of course, I'm more toward adoptees because I am one, but I also feel that it's really, really important to speak to all sides and to really listen. And I think what we want to do too is we want to hear the anger and the pain. We want to hear the gravity of it, and also the hope, so that, and maybe that's really broad right now, and maybe will change as we evolve. But it feels right now, I really want to be inclusive. And when I look at your work and I see that you actually spend a decent amount of time, and probably still do, advising, adoptive parents. And I wonder, I just want to check the time to be respectful. We have some time. What would you, if you could kind of summarize it for those groups, like if you could distill down like the most beautiful part of your advice, what would you tell birth original families? What would you say to the adoptee and the adopted parents. Like, what can we like get from that beautiful mind?
I love that you included birth and first. I think you had said original, the language that you used, and I'm very grateful that you asked that and that you included. I'm when I'm interviewed, it's rare that someone says, what's your advice to? And I'm oftentimes asked, what is your advice takeaway for adoptees? And what's your takeaway and advice to adoptive parents? But rarely am I asked about the first family. So thank you, Heidi, for asking that. So I'm going to do that one last because this is a first to have been asked that, and I definitely have some thoughts, but to do it within the time frame that we have.
I know. You just do whatever you want, Astrid.
Yeah. So my go-to advice, I will say to the adoptee community is. If you are listening to this podcast or you have heard something that speaks to you that is an adoptee-driven space, that you are not alone, and don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to ask for support. And whether it's Adoption Mosaic, I don't think that we can be all things to all people. And I hold a space at Adoption Mosaic, and we as an agency and organization, we hold space that says we are not pro-adoption. We're not anti-adoption. We're pro-informed decision-making. And yeah, absolutely. And there are adoptees out there who say, you know what, that's not a fit for me because I am anti-adoption. I don't want to be in collaboration or in community with somebody or an organization that has this kind of philosophy. And there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. And so you can call Adoption Mosaic and we can get you connected, or you can find other organizations that do fit what it is that you need. If you're a pro and an adoptee that's pro-adoption, there's nothing wrong with that. You get to find your community. You get to find your people just as much as we deserve. Those of us who are in whatever space we're in, we are deserving of finding our community, and we're out there. All of those and everything in between, right, is out there. And so especially I think Zoom has helped us realize that we don't have to be as isolated. If we're living in a rural, town that doesn't have Adoptees Connect organization or doesn't have, a support group or something like that, that's Zoom has allowed us to connect in a way that we've never connected before. So I can say that with confidence. If you have access to the internet and you have a computer, I will help you get connected, or somebody within Adoption Mosaic will help you get connected to your community. So reach out. And it might be hard and it might be scary because you're not sure what's on the other end. And I'd say for the most part, us adoptees who are doing this work have space for helping adoptees get to their community. My advice to adoptive parents is I would really like to have access to every pre-adopt parent before they decide to adopt, because I don't think that we can make informed decisions around whether to adopt or not to adopt. We can't make those informed decisions unless we really dissect and do the work. And the work means unpacking maybe your infertility, unpacking your childlessness in the normal, air quotes, normal way. If that is something that you have to unpack in order to be the parent you want to be, you need to do that work before you adopt. If you're adopting a child of color, you have to do your work around race and racism and your own internalized race and racism, and you owe it to your child. And whether you're a pre-adopt parent or you're a currently parenting parent, that is doing the work is not something I hear very often in the past. And I'm starting to hear more and more where us adoptee professionals are saying, yeah, we really need you to show up here in this space, not asking us to do our work without you doing your work. And I think that happens a lot. It's like, oh, well, my kid, I'm putting my kid in therapy because they're really struggling and so forth. And for every time I hear that, I want to hear that the parents are in therapy, figuring out how to parent a child who is not, for whatever reason, isn't molding or fitting into the style of your parenting style. I will say with my own experience, my parents didn't have the tools or resources to parent traumatized children. And it was in the 70s, and yeah, sure, they were left to their own device. You adopt and, then the system and all the support systems go away and you're on your own. And Mia and I we were 4.5 and 6. If we had not experienced any abuse or neglect or hunger or any of those things, it still would have been traumatizing, right? And yet we experienced all of those things, and we brought those things into our family without having parents who knew how to navigate that. So that's some advice that I have for adoptive parents. And then first and birth parents, I feel that it's similar to the advice that I have for adoptees, is there's your community. You are not alone, and there is a community. There's birth parent support groups. There's birth first parents who are speaking out, and the pendulum or the range of where they stand as far as being pro or anti, or having to work finding therapists who specialize and understand the experience of being a birth first parent. And then I will say there's the constellation. There's everything in between, as you know, Heidi. Like, I just did a panel on second generation adoptees, and my daughter, for the first time, she's been waiting. She said on the panel, I've been waiting my whole life. I'm 18, and we have a rule at Adoption Mosaic. If you're a minor, we don't put you on a panel. It was well spoken as you may be. That is a really important rule because of the things that we were talking about at the beginning of this. And so my daughter has been, when do I get to be on a panel? And she's not an adoptee, but she was raised by an adoptee, and how my parenting has been a reflection of how, one, I was parented, and two, the trauma and the loss that I had. So the way I parent her, being a helicopter parent for us adoptees, looks different than being.
I see you. Can you hear my blades? Can you hear the blades, Astrid? Yeah.
I used to say to Maya when she was in middle school, early days of high school, I used to say, you know what, baby girl, I'm going to tell you something that is so unfair. It just is. I need you to be in contact with me more than probably your friends are going to need to be in contact with their parents. And I'm scared every day that I'm going to lose you. And that is something that I work on. I will always work on. And that comes from this experience that I had. I have a biological, it's part of my DNA to have these emotions and these feelings. And yes, I'm trying to be reasonable about them, and being taken away from your mother, there's no rationale that comes with that. So I need you to understand that, because I'm sorry that you have to carry the burden of this. It's not fair. And I want you to know that you are so loved, and that I'm terrified of losing you.
Astrid, Oh, yeah, it's getting pretty predictable now that I cry for most of these. But I just have to speak just a tiny bit about that. I am so incredibly thrilled to hear that we are beginning to realize the impact is also expressed to our children. And when I wrote the chapter in my book about my son, which I still haven't shared with him, he's almost 24. And when I was excavating that out and realizing how much of my parenting was fear-based. And I remember when I was having that realization, we sat out on the deck and I told him basically what you told your daughter.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he said, as I'm apologizing, he said, Mom, I just want you to know, even though all of that happened, you're enough. Oh, Astrid, that was like so huge, because that's part of why we're doing this. Because what if someone can hear this before they have their kids, or maybe, and I believe there's always space for healing. Yes, I wish I would have known this from the get-go. I did not.
Yeah.
That's what it is. But at least I had the chance to tell my son, I am growing, I am learning, I am trying to master my trauma. And so I just thank you so much for sharing that. That's so important. And I also thank you for thinking that, my question about the birth, the original family is important, because honestly, like, that's where it begins. And to not look at that and understand that all of this is rippled.
Yeah.
There is no way it's all interconnected, at least in my mind. And Astrid, I'm just, wow, so grateful you moved me deeply. We have just a few more minutes. Are there any final thoughts or anything you have? And I have a little quote that I pulled out for you I'd like to read too before we go. So if there's anything else you'd like to do to wrap it up, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Heidi. And the expression of emotion and showing how raw this is for us is something that I think, yes, it's one of those things where we need to allow space for that. And like you said, oh my gosh, if every parent could hear these stories and say, I'm not just parenting my child from 0 to 18, or, in our situation, it was for 14 years, from 4 to 18. We need you to put, these special glasses on that so many parents don't have to put on because it's mainstream, right? And we need you to put these special glasses on that will show you the future and show you what the 18 to 75 looks like. How are we living out to that part of it? How is my daughter feeling connected to her birth grandparents, her adoptive grandparents, her dad's biological, all of these pieces is so much bigger than just this finalization of an adoption so I can become a parent, or so I, whatever the end result is. Really thinking about the end result is a young adult to a senior citizen and how they're navigating this trauma and this experience of being separated.
It's a lifetime. You said that so beautifully, Astrid. And usually I start off the interview. Before I interview, I say a little prayer to whoever's out there on the different days. I believe different things. But I have this beautiful quote box, and I pulled this quote, and it's for you. We are each gifted in a unique and important way. It is our privilege and our adventure to discover our own special light. And Astrid, I have to say you are a light, and you are beautiful. And I appreciate your emotional labor today on our behalf. And I will never forget this conversation. From my heart to yours, I thank you so much for this extraordinary time together. And I hope I get to meet you. We live close enough. We should make that happen.
We do. Absolutely. Not we should, we will make that happen.
We will, Astrid.
We will. It's just going to happen. Yeah.
Yes,
Bringing my adoptee community is one of the things that I live for. And so bringing us together. And
and we'll probably come back to the podcast and I'll tell you all about it.
Okay. Yes. Perfect.
Astrid, I adore you. Thank you so much.
Ditto.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.